In the port of Ugarit, on the Syrian coast, a courier arrives carrying a clay tablet. It is wrapped in cloth, still damp from the sea air, and its message is stripped of all ceremony. It is a plea from a king who does not beg. The great king of Hatti, master of the Anatolian plateau, needs food. His words, pressed into the clay, are stark. Send grain ships and send them fast. A landlocked empire, built on rock and military might, is asking its coastal vassal for life. Weeks pass. A second letter, this one from Ugarit's own king, Amurapi, makes its way to a nervous ally in Alashiya, the island of Cyprus. The letter is a warning. Enemy ships have been sighted off the coast. The city is undefended. Its troops, its chariots, its best men are all far inland, serving the Hittite king whose own pleas for grain just arrived. The horns at the harbor now sound not for trade, but for alarm. Then the correspondence stops. Ugarit burns. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, goes silent. There is no final decree, no heroic last stand recorded in the archives. Just ash and a sudden profound absence where an empire once stood. To understand the silence, we must first hear the thunder. For nearly 5 centuries, from roughly 1650 to 1200 BC, the Hittites were one of the great powers of the Bronze Age. From their capital at Hattusa, perched on a rocky plateau in modern-day Turkey, they commanded a vast and complex empire. Their power was built on disciplined infantry, groundbreaking iron weaponry, and the terrifying shock tactic of the heavy 3-man war chariot. Roads radiated from their highland fortress, connecting mountain garrisons to fertile plains and, crucially, to the wealthy Syrian territories to the south. The empire's golden age began with a king whose name meant, "from the pure spring," Šuppiluliuma I. Ascending the throne around 1344 BC, he was a master strategist. He shattered the rival Mitanni kingdom, pushed south into Syria, and transformed former enemies into loyal vassals. He installed his own sons as viceroys in key cities like Carchemish on the Euphrates River, creating a buffer that would secure the Hittite heartland for generations. Under Šuppiluliuma, the empire looked not just strong, but permanent. This permanence was tested at the Battle of Kadesh, around 1274 BC. Here, the Hittite king Muwatalli II faced the armies of the young, ambitious pharaoh Ramesses II. It was a clash of titans near the Orontes River. Hittite intelligence outmaneuvered the Egyptians, and their heavy 3-man chariots, a driver, a warrior, and a shield-bearer, crashed into the pharaoh's flank. Ramses barely escaped with his life. The battle ended in a bloody stalemate, a brutal lesson for both empires on the limits of military force. From that bloody field came something unprecedented. About 15 years later, around 1259 BC, the Hittites and Egyptians signed a treaty of eternal peace. It is the earliest surviving international peace treaty in history. Engraved on a silver tablet, of which clay copies survive, it codified borders, created a mutual defense pact, and even arranged for the extradition of political refugees. A copy in Akkadian cuneiform was stored at Hattusa. Another, in Egyptian hieroglyphs, was carved onto the walls of the Karnak temple. Law, for the first time, spoke with the same authority as the sword. To walk the streets of Hattusa at its zenith was to be humbled by stone and scale. A massive circuit of double walls, more than 6 kilometers long, snaked over the rocky landscape, enclosing an upper and a lower city. To enter, you passed through monumental gateways guarded by carved lions, sphinxes, or a warrior god, each designed to awe visitors and intimidate enemies. Inside, the city was a sprawling complex of palaces, administrative buildings, workshops, and archives. It was the nerve center of a superpower. The Hittites called their homeland the Land of 1,000 Gods, and Hattusa was their sanctuary. Archaeologists have identified over 70 temples within the city walls. The largest, the great temple dedicated to the storm god of Hatti and the sun goddess of Arena, was a vast complex of storerooms and courtyards centered on a sacred inner cella. Here, the king acted as high priest, making offerings to win divine favor for harvests, for health, and for victory in war. The empire ran on grain and chariots, but it was held together by faith. That faith, along with law, diplomacy, and trade, was administered on clay. Over 30,000 cuneiform tablets and fragments have been unearthed at Hattusa. They are the paperwork of empire: royal annals, diplomatic correspondence, law codes, land grants, literary texts, and intricate rituals for every festival of the year. This library of clay was the empire's memory and its operating system, the web of words that bound a patchwork of peoples to a single royal will. But even the strongest walls can be breached from within. In the mid-13th century, the royal line fractured. Hattušili III, a skilled general and younger brother of the previous king, usurped the throne from his own nephew, Urhi-Tesub. In a remarkable text we call his Apology, Hattušili argues his case before the gods, painting his nephew as incompetent and himself as the chosen savior of the state. It is a masterpiece of political propaganda, but it reveals a deep and dangerous rift in the heart of the royal family. To secure his contested throne, Hattušili needed powerful allies. He elevated a cousin named Kurunta, granting him exceptional autonomy over the southern territory of Tarḥuntašša. The treaty, inscribed on a magnificent bronze tablet, created a secondary seat of power within the empire. It was a necessary political gamble, but it sowed the seeds of future division. Decades later, seal impressions were found bearing Kurunta's name and the title Great King, the same title used by the ruler in Hattusa. Two crowns now existed where there should have been one. While the palace schemed, the land grew thirsty. The Anatolian plateau was always a marginal environment. In good years, it fed the empire. In bad years, it starved. Earlier kings like Mursili II had recorded years of devastating plague. Now, a new threat emerged: climate change. And on the eastern frontier, the kingdom of Assyria was rising, growing more aggressive, testing Hittite borders and tempting their Syrian vassals to switch allegiance. The web of treaties that held the empire together was being pulled taut from all sides. This was Hattusa's fatal weakness: a highland capital increasingly dependent on grain from its coastal vassals. When drought struck the heartland, the only lifeline came from the sea, from the ports of Ugarit and from Alashiya. The survival of the king, his court, and his armies depended on ships they did not build and seas they did not control. The letters preserved at Ugarit show the rising panic. Pleas for grain become demands. The tone is that of a powerful man realizing his power is useless against a failed harvest. Scientific evidence confirms their fears. Tree ring and isotope data from across the eastern Mediterranean point to a severe, multi-year drought event around 1198 to 1196 BC. It was a short, sharp shock that destabilized food production across the region. For the Hittite Empire, with its internal divisions and external enemies, this climate shock hit at the worst possible moment. The fields of the plateau turned to dust. The sea lanes, once a lifeline, were about to become a battleground. The sea brought not just grain, but terror. These are the years when Egyptian records speak of the Sea Peoples, mysterious confederations of maritime raiders who toppled kingdoms across the Levant. While their exact identity is debated, their impact is not. King Amurapi's letter from Ugarit gives us a snapshot of the chaos. Enemy ships are here, and my garrisons are gone. The coast was stripped to feed the core, and now the coast was breaking. The last known Hittite king, Šuppiluliuma II, took a desperate, unprecedented gamble. In his own inscriptions, written in the hieroglyphic Luwian script, he boasts of naval victories against Alashiya. He claims to have defeated his enemies at sea. A land power, a kingdom of mountains and plains, was forced to build a fleet and fight on the waves. It was a sign not of strength, but of adaptation born from pure desperation. The threads of the empire were snapping, trade routes failed, caravans were raided, and vassals stopped answering their summons. Back in Hattusa, the end was not glorious. The archaeological record is chillingly clear. Between 1200 and 1180 BC, the great capital was violently destroyed and abandoned. But the final layer is not of a grand battle. There are no mass graves. The great storerooms were burned, their massive clay pithoi shattered by the heat, but they were already mostly empty. The city appears to have starved, its people scattered, and only then was it put to the torch. The archives fall silent before the destruction. The last scribes did not record the fall. They were too busy fleeing it. Imagine the last days. Officials packing what they can carry, a cylinder seal, a few vital tablets, a household god, and slipping out through the Sphinx gate, the one built for kings and gods. They never came back. The emptying of Hattusa was total. No new dynasty rose from the ashes on that hill. Power drained away from the plateau, leaving the once mighty citadel to the wind and the wolves. The center had not held. But Hittite civilization did not vanish completely. It shattered. In the subsequent Iron Age, a constellation of smaller Neo-Hittite or Luwian-speaking kingdoms emerged in southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria. Cities like Carchemish, Melide, and Tabal carried the torch. They worshipped Hittite gods, wrote in a version of their script, and their art echoed the styles of the fallen empire. The memory survived, but it was now local, fragmented, and smaller. We can still touch the greatness. The Hittite-Egyptian peace treaty, preserved in both clay and stone, remains a testament to a time when two superpowers chose law over endless war. And near Hattusa, the open-air rock sanctuary of Yazılıkaya endures. Here, King Tudhaliya IV had his kingdom's gods carved in a great procession, marching across the living rock. He even had his own image placed among them. The gods and the king are still there, frozen in stone, outlasting the palaces of the living by millennia. Why did it fall? There was no single cause, but a cascade of failures. A complex system grew too rigid. A severe drought struck a fragile agricultural base. Internal political fractures weakened the state at the worst possible moment, and external pressures from the sea and the land severed the trade routes that were its final lifeline. Each crisis amplified the others, creating a perfect storm from which there was no escape. Strong walls could not hold back climate change, and the world's first great peace treaty could not stop a famine. The story of the Hittites is a reminder that no empire is permanent, and that collapse can come with shocking speed. A plea for grain becomes a last whispered word. If you find stories like this, where history speaks to us from silent ruins, You will feel at home here. This is Dustkings. We explore the rise, the fall, and the echoes left behind by the great civilizations of the past. Subscribe for more stories from the annals of collapse. Thank you for watching.